Right, here we are, Friday. We took last week off, but it is my favorite time of the week. Get to talk about API storytelling. So, without much more, let me bring on Aidan. Hey, Aidan.
Hey Ken, how are you doing?
Doing good. I missed you last week.
Yeah, I missed you too. I got to do my first outdoor comedy though. I actually did it last week, which was awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
Outdoors, like with other people.
I stood on a barrel and people were like 40 feet away. I think that's how old comedians used to do it. So it was very much like a throwback to the olden days.
Okay, we got to do another session dedicated to standing on a barrel. Like we got to just go down that road. But let's get Mike in here before we don't want to get derailed here. Let's bring Mike on. What's up, Mike?
Hey there, how you doing? You can hear me okay?
Can.
All right. I had a little brief moment when I saw the two of you talking and I couldn't hear a thing. I freaked out, but it's all good. It's all good now. It's all good.
Audio difficulties. Uh-oh. We're skipping.
Okay. We'll see. We'll see how it goes here.
All right. We'll do it.
All right.
Well, we took last week off. Hope you guys got some rest.
Definitely. I've been swamped. Things are picking up. I got to kind of manage my time a little better. I applaud your aspiration of a mental health day. I just haven't been able to put one together yet.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to have the CEO mandate it. Is what I learned. But not all of us listen, unfortunately. I still worked a little bit, but
my boss is a slave driver.
Yes. Yes, he is. I've known him for a lot of years. He's horrible. He's so
terrible.
Like you should write him a letter. He might respond to that.
You think? I might just aggravate him. I don't know. We'll see.
So who do we got joining us today, Mike?
So I'm really happy to bring to the storytelling series Alianna Inzana. I've known Alianna for a couple of years. She's currently at Smart Bear, Senior Director of API Product Management. But I know from talking with her, every time we talk, we enjoy so many things. She's got a degree in molecular biology. She's worked as a licensed stockbroker. She's been involved in futures trading for natural gas services, sending ships all over the world. She's got a fantastic set of experiences in APIs and product management in general. So I'm really happy she's coming. I'm looking forward to her joining us today.
Wow. I'm a little blown away. Okay, well, let me bring her on. Let's just get her in here. Hey,
Hello.
Hey, there you are. How you doing?
Oh, man. I got an hour to live up to that intro? That's crazy.
That is kind of bad. Aidan knows what I just did, right? I just said, you're going to love this person so much. This is the worst thing for me to do, right, Aidan?
I think she'll live up to it.
I think so too.
But I knew none of these other stories about your older careers last time we talked. It didn't come up. So I'm really excited to hear more.
You know, we could probably fill a couple of podcasts, but I think it's actually really great to talk about it in the context of storytelling, right? Because I don't know, I think a lot of people think of storytelling and they think of like, I am developing a narrative and I'm going to do like the outline and then I'm going to do the putting the flesh on the bones and stories don't necessarily happen like that. And I think the thing that is kind of cool in like wherever we wind up going today is at the end of the journey, that's the story. That's the story we're meant to tell today. And that's the stuff that people are meant to get out of it. And I've had to become something of a storyteller to actually knit together like, so molecular cell biology, and now you're building API products. And what about your engineering degree? I'm like, what engineering degree? So, you know, it's been interesting as a woman in tech, as a woman in the energy industry or in finance, like to set my place at the table with the stories, to use the narrative to introduce the value that I can provide and the perspective that I bring, and then to just figure out like, well, how in heck did I wind up where I wound up and doing what I do? And it took a lot of introspection to actually figure out like, oh yeah, there is narrative structure. We didn't start out with narrative structure, but it's there. So I'm actually really excited to join the podcast today. And I've loved the previous episodes. I think that the emphasis is right on, because in the end, the story is the thing. The story is what stays with you.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the George Box quote, all models are wrong, some models are useful. And I like literally change model for story all the time. And it really just depends on what I heard in your intro there is like, you can tell the story in, forward or backwards. You have to find the one that works for you in the moment. And I'm really excited to hear a little bit about like how you chose these stories, how they came to be, and which ones you've really made a part of your identity, and which ones you've sort of said like, these ones can go over here. And that's always exciting to me to hear like how these all come together and how we build the narrative interactively.
Absolutely.
So the financial story, the molecular biology, are those past stories, or are those still influencing your API realm, would you say?
I think that that's a great question, because the answer really is like yes and no. Like, am I, doing futures trading with APIs or anything like that? No, I'm not. But at the same time, my role in tech now is as a product manager. And to me, being a product manager is being storyteller in chief to your product organization. And the thing that I think, like, each work persona that I embodied at a different time has brought something to the one that I embody now. Like, one of the first things I remember my first boss saying when I was at Morgan Stanley was, because he said it all the time, was paper trail, paper trail, paper trail. And to me, that's just like, I was a scientist. So that's like, you don't like toss out bad experiments or something that, I sneezed in that one. You don't get rid of it, because there's something that you learn from every experiment. And then when I was doing, institutional asset management, and we were talking to private equity firms and hedge funds and like all of these crazy people, like, you had to maintain documentation of like, what did they say they were going to do? Are they following the rubric that they set out for themselves? So, when I think about, okay, as a stockbroker, you learn set your stop loss before you go in. You learn how to interrogate and recognize patterns to make investments. And you also learn how to probe a little bit deeper when you're talking with an organization or a person about what are their objectives, what are their goals. Because, I could tell you, well, I can tolerate a whole ton of risk. Well, really, like, what is the next thing that you're planning on doing with your life? Oh, I'm going to get married. We're about to buy a house. Like, should I be investing you in stocks that like you could wipe yourself out and like you have a house buying thing that's about to happen? So it really, I think if you allow it to, it can inform what you do in the present, all of the things you've been and done in the past. But the thing that I think people lack, and it's why I think this is so important, is the ability to tell themselves the story of how they got there. Because if they could tell that story to themselves, if they could explain to themselves how they got there, and I've had more challenge doing that than probably most would, then you can actually take the good stuff with you, and the bad stuff if you choose to. And that, I think, it's an uncommon skill today, and it's one that we don't teach it as much, we don't value it as much, because we keep on thinking, oh, it's about the outcome. But the outcome in the absence of the story doesn't actually like it doesn't like motivate people. Like people don't care that Bezos has a crap ton of money. It's that he started off with Amazon, like the world's ugliest book buying website. Like, that's the thing that's exciting about him having a lot of money right now, how he got there. And that, I think, is what motivates people. And in the end, we build software now, but it's all about people, because at least at this point in time, people are still the ones who are doing that. They're still the ones who are deciding what's valuable, constructing it, experimenting with it, learning. So that to me is kind of that's the flow that I see, at least, and kind of how past selves inform future selves, even through a very strange path to get there.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this on this podcast before. The stories that we choose to tell, right? The stories about ourselves or the stories we choose to tell ourselves have a kind of a way of shaping our futures, right? There's a great book by Tim O'Brien, The Things They Carried, which are about Vietnam era veterans and the things that happen to them and the things that they choose to dwell on, the things that they can't get past, or the things that they try to forget, right? And it's really telling stories through the stories that they tell themselves. And I find, a lot of what you're saying very similar. I have a pretty circuitous path too. I started in music and all these other things, and it was a long way to get to where I am today. And I don't have a I don't have an engineering degree or a science degree at all, but I could tell that story lots of ways. Like, I just stumbled here, I just fell into this, pure luck, no skill. I could tell this story as it prepared me in various ways. And I can tell the story about, detours, or I could tell the story about a magical path that led me straight here. It's the way we talk to ourselves that sort of informs the world around us, right? And I think, you and I have talked about this before too. It turns out you've had kind of a similar experience in a lot of places, right? Your experience, the experience you had at the brokerage, the experience you had in dealing with, shipping, natural gas all over the world, the experience you're having with APIs, there are similarities that you can sort of attach to, right?
Yeah. You talk about the stories that we tell ourselves. Sometimes it's just the phrases we repeat. And one of the ones that I have a tendency to repeat is like, oh, we recognize this brick wall. We can see our forehead print in it. It's like you're banging your head against the brick wall again, the same thing, different. Here it is again. Welcome to it. But, it's interesting. Like, as a woman in tech, I'm just like, try being a woman in the finance in the 90s. Try being a woman in the energy industry. Like, I've done the sort of like misogyny tour of duty there, right? As a pure person in these industries as well. And you know what, the thing that I think is really interesting too is like, I actually started, so my mom is the CEO of she's retired now, but she was CEO of a non-for-profit. She's a founder. She started it herself. She worked with, abused kids, with HIV positive mothers and babies. Like, she did some major, major stuff. And, kind of going into that theme of like, you can't be what you can't see. When I worked in institutional asset management, so like major hospital systems, people where, the people on the board, it was like the desk that Citigroup was incorporated on, I was in my 20s. I was an idiot with a degree in biology. Why in heck should I have ever been in those rooms? And why should those people have actually ever listened to me? But the thing was, my mom was this, powerful, empowered woman. And so I was just like, of course they should listen to me because, I'm maybe not their years of experience and everything, but I have a perspective. I've done the analysis. Like, this is what in science you are taught is your bona fides. Like, if you've done the analysis, you can talk about it. That's what you should do. And the audience was really receptive. And I thought that was normal. And what I have come to realize as time goes by, that like they were accepting of Allie, of me doing what I did. I don't think they would have been tremendously accepting if I brought a whole horde of women in with me, because it was that exceptionalism. It was like, you are our one. Like, it's not diversity. It's not any of those things. It's, you're one of the boys, which is another narrative that might flow through a few things here. But the funny thing about it was, at the time, I never questioned it. And then I developed and went out into the world and developed a wider experience of the world. And I realized, like, there are people who think my opinion doesn't matter because I'm a woman. What bullshit is this?
Yes.
So, it's really interesting for me because the initial story I told myself was like, I've seen it. This is what women can be. This is what women can do. And I then had the world tell me my narrative was wrong, or like my context, my framing was wrong. And I had to spend years struggling with that. And then as I wound up following this kind of strangely circuitous path, and there was always like a reason for the next thing, but like, it wasn't entirely clear at the time what that was. But the thing that I think is really interesting about it is, okay, so the next thing happened, and this especially happened when I became a product manager. I was regularly like the platform product manager. So I was the person who was helping subject matter experts deliver information and insight to the people, whoever those people were, whatever the particular demographic or whatever was. So it was, again, like, this week it was LNG, it was liquefied natural gas. Next week, we just acquired 2 chemical companies. Go to Houston, bring them onto the platform. Like, by the way, they've been competitors for 45 years and they hate each other. Just like, what? So I'm just like, and what do I know about any of this? But the thing that I actually wound up finding out, again, the story you tell yourself, is I was bringing new perspective to stuff. And it was a perspective that the entrenched subject matter experts, it's like they couldn't see beyond the way that they had learned something, the way they had been taught that thing. And so I guess it gave me the brass to tell Smart Bear, like, yeah, I should be leading your virtualization product because I've heard of Swagger, and and now I go around talking about it. But the first time that I ever did that was in the ASC that was in Vancouver. Like, that was the first time I ever spoke on APIs. So, old as I am and everything else, I was dropped into the industry where it's multi-protocol. There's a lot of different ways that people are interacting with these services. There's a whole sort of new thought behind what's important and what is valued in them. But yeah, I was like just sort of dropped into the middle of it going like, I am terrified. But by that point, I was just like, but I'll figure it out.
I don't know if this makes sense, Ken. I mean, I think when I listen to Ali talking about sort of being somewhat of a non-traditional type or coming from a different angle and working in this API space, you've had some of that same experience as well, right? Ken, you don't come from the sort of the same direction, and you've been sort of odd person out before. You've been the outsider in the in group more than once, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the foundation of who I am, is always coming from that perspective. I mean, I don't have a college degree. I'm not trained in anything. I actually don't have a high school diploma either. But and so, like, trying to find my way to where I got here is I mean, it's too much for one podcast for sure, but definitely that imposter syndrome to a certain degree. I've had that, but I've learned to cope with that. For me, the opposite of you, like the realization along the way of my privilege and that I'm a white man. Like, I mean, 95 through 2010, I did not see it. I was just unplugged, and I was like, this is easy. I can walk into these rooms and command presence and everyone just listens to me. It's like, this is great. I'm so smart. And then, like, and then I met this new woman that I'm now married to, and she started pointing certain things out to me, and I'm like, oh man, I've been operating on easy mode, and it's like, oh. And then I went to work at the White House and went into veterans, work with Veterans Affairs. And one quick thing on my past is I'm actually LNG certified to fight fires on cargo ships. I actually did that. In Abu Dhabi in 1990. I was fighting fire. So we'll go back to that another time. But so yeah, so maybe our paths crossed. Our ships crossed on the sea at some point a long time ago. But definitely, I mean, and if I'm too comfortable in a room, I start feeling weird now, because I feel like and the echo chamber of the API space, I'm constantly trying to, and that's what API Strat and Ask, that became Ask, was all about, is constantly mining the playing field. Who are you? What do you do? Well, I don't do APIs. I work in the train industry, in the transit. Well, perfect. Come tell your story.
Yeah.
Hey, you're, who are you? Well, I work in healthcare. I don't know anything about APIs. I'm like, well, come talk about interoperability, and so it's really good to hear that Ask was that for you, because that's precisely what that event is for. And to anybody listening, Call for Papers just open.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. The funny thing about the Ask conference was, I actually, when I originally was going to go, Ron Witowski, who's part of the Swagger team, he's at Smart Bear. He really kind of, like, I was just like, I don't know if I've been doing this like long enough, and he was just like, you don't have to go there and deliver War and Peace. Like, it's a brief presentation. You know what you're going to talk about beforehand, and you can totally do this. You can totally. You're good at speaking. You talk a lot, which is accurate. He's like, just write a presentation, do it. You're going to go. It's Vancouver. Vancouver's lovely. I'm like, fine. So I go, and then maybe 2 days before I'm about to leave, Daryl reaches out and says, by the way, we're doing a keynote panel on API tooling. So you're going to do it together with wonderful Joyce from Postman and one of the folks from Transposit and Phil Sturgeon from Stoplight. And at that point, again, new to our industry and everything else, my only experience of Phil, who is a lovely guy, was his slightly more takedown oriented persona when somebody said something wrong about the specification formerly known as Swagger on Twitter. And I was just like, with him? And I was just like, Daryl, give me all the damn questions ahead of time. And I was just like, are you kidding me right now? Like, no, I'm not going to do this. And, Emmanuel, who was also on the committee, was just like, you'll be great. Don't worry about it. And I was all nerves.
Support. Go ahead.
I remember sitting in the front row when you did this, and you fit in naturally. I wouldn't have known.
I got a decent poker face, I guess.
Well, the guy who shows up as Phil isn't this the thing online is AI. That's not Phil.
Yeah.
Those are two different
I have
things.
since come to realize.
If you write a Twitter bot to find every time he says don't call it Swagger, it's like more than a human could type in a day. Like
but the guy, when you sit and have a pint with the person, he's the sweetest, most lovely person on earth. He never says anything confrontational. He's like super mellow. So
I had absolutely no idea. I thought he had 3 heads. I was just like, I think this. And then I met him, and I really was like, it's the same guy, really, for real? Like, okay, because he is.
We love you, Phil.
Yeah, Phil, we love you. Plant another tree.
I thought it was sitting here listening to us all talk about being outsiders. I feel like it's only fair to say that none of us have an engineering degree, and none of the 3 of us do. Yes, or also in that too. But I think your point earlier about sort of the other perspective is really interesting, and I think like one of the beautiful things about getting to pick the stories we tell is that they often are invertible. So the imposter syndrome inverts to perspective most of the time. And I think if one were to go back and look at that in their own lives, they can think of at least a few occasions where that outsider thing was their ace in the hole. And write those down, put that on your wall, and then whenever you feel it, just go look at it.
I could not agree with you more, because, the thing that I think is, so I'm a product manager, right? So when I began product management, it was like waterfall, it was product requirement documents, which were like, don't drop them on your foot. I honestly think it is a miracle that anything that anybody wanted ever was built in this way. And so I've told this story before, so I'll be very quick with it, but I do think it's funny. So I didn't realize that being a product manager was a thing one could do I was an LNG analyst at a company called Global Insight, later became IHS Markit. And I was known for solving problems. Like I was good at solving problems. And there was this thing that we were building. It was called the Navigator. It was a means of delivering data to our customers. Somebody delivered a product requirements document. They shied it over the fence to our developers in Poland. A couple months later, they came back. I don't know what the heck it was. It was not what we were asking for. Everybody hated everybody. And my boss was like, Piotr and the others, they're going to quit. This is what we told them to build. Can you call him on Monday and like fix this? And I'm like, all right. So I sat down with the document and a highlighter and it was printed. And I was just like, 90% of this is crap. No one is ever going to use this. Like you need to do this and this and this, and then we'll figure out the rest of it. And so I called him on Monday and I was like, well, don't quit. Let's unscrew up this problem. Make it do this, this, and this, and forget about the rest of this stuff. And for Christ's sake, call me every week. No, call me every day. We're going to talk every day, and we're going to figure out like what we're going to do next, what's happened. We're going to share the build, blah, blah, blah. And I now joke with this developer. He's gone on to other things, and so have I. I'm like, but remember when we invented Agile together? Like, wasn't that awesome? Like, because I had no idea. I had no idea that being a product manager was a job. I had no idea like what the process was supposed to be. All I knew is that what they had done was idiotic, and they didn't really think about what you actually, like a human being, what would they actually be doing with this stuff, and how would their needs evolve? And so once I just, discovered what it is I wound up doing for a very long time there, I got trained in Agile and all this other stuff, and we did the waterfall to Agile conversion, which I recommend to anyone who wants to better improve their patience and question their perspective on reality a lot. You're like, didn't I ask this? Didn't I say that? But what I really got out of that whole experience of learning to do that is, as a product manager, it's always about, well, what is the person doing? And not being satisfied with like, if I ask the customers, put a pink button in the middle of the page, and I'm just like, I don't like pink buttons, it's not about listening to what they ask you for, because they're going to ask you for stuff. I have customers now, they ask me for tons of stuff, but it's for listening to what they need. And I think you could tie that back to absolutely anything you want. Being a good ally to the queer communities or to women. It's like, you may have a narrative in your head of what I need to for the world to know what a wonderful product manager and tech person Allie is, right? But it's just like, did you ask me what I need? And that's such an important aspect of what we do as product managers, because it's just like, well, what do you want? What do you want the outcome to be? What are you going to do with the thing that because like APIs, people are like, well, is anybody thinking like my outcome is I want to write a YAML file? Beautiful as they may be, like,
yeah.
No, and like for me, it's, well, I want to create a behavior. I want to build, and also we're the home of Cucumber, but like I am interested in creating a behavior. I'm creating a scenario, a journey for our customer, and the customer's journey is enabled by APIs. I'm like, all right, well, why don't we build that? Because it's a fundamental shift that somebody who has been writing YAML files for a really long time may never see, because that's how they do it, right? And I've done the same thing in the energy industry. I've done the same thing for, even in finance. The way that we were doing asset allocation at Morgan Stanley and those other companies was very different to how other people were doing it, because we were really looking to make the portfolio efficient and to understand risk in real time and risk and reward alpha, which now, all the finance blogs talks about, but back then no one was talking real options and Black-Scholes optimization and like all that other junk, right? So it's seeing the same day, the same material laid out, and having a very different perspective because of the journey you've been on, in terms of, well, how do you achieve those outcomes, and how do I talk to my customers and hopefully soon to be customers about what their needs are and what they're going to do next and what the intention is. And I think like that's a skill too, that if you push too hard into the pink buttons area where your customers are just being mouthy and they're going to ask you for 50,000 things and you feel the need that you must do all those things, you will lose the opportunity to give them and deliver to them value. And that's the thing that, you know, I always try to impress upon my product teams, but also just, you know, it's how I think about building product. And I think that is the advantage of never being the expert in the room, because I don't have that preconceived notion of like, you know, a chemical engineer who's a, you know, the purchasing manager for ethylene is going to want to do it like this because that's what they've always done.
You know, hearing you talk about this reminds me of a thing that I experienced a long time ago, which is I sometimes think of the opposite of storytelling is I call it active listening, like this idea of really paying attention. You know, there's the, like you were saying about customers will tell you they want a pink button. Good designers, good product managers, I always go, why? Like, why? You know, and that's like the 5 whys from the Toyota system, and to just kind of dig a little. There's the double diamond design pattern from a group in the UK, which I can't remember. It's the same idea, right? Aidan, does that sound familiar? You're kind of making signs there.
I also asked why 3 times, but I like the idea of asking 5.
5, yeah, right. The 5 whys, right? But I think all of this is that notion when I'm not the expert in the room, which I think is going back to what Ken is saying, which is quite often. I'm actively listening. I'm really trying to take things in, and I'm trying to match things up with what I already know. Give me some context in the situation, and when I'm feeling comfortable, then I also ask a lot of questions. I say, "Oh, I don't quite understand that. I don't quite get that. Can you repeat that?" And it starts to seem an awful lot like a design session, an awful lot like a collaboration session. And I think that's part of the storytelling idea or you know, ethos is also being a great listener for other people's stories. So I think it kind of falls hand in hand in a lot of different ways. We all need to be thinking and listening, you know, at some sort of level. I go back. I'm just a chestnut from the RestFest days. You know, our line at RestFest was everybody talks and everybody listens, right? Everybody gets a chance to listen. And I think that's a big part of success, no matter where you're from or where you're going. Listening is a key to getting to being successful, I think.
I absolutely agree. And, you know, I think the other part of it too is just, you know, there's I think Einstein said it, if you told me I had an hour that I had to solve a problem, I would spend, you know, 55 minutes of that hour thinking about the problem itself and then 5 minutes solving it. And that, I think, is what that really is it's being able to sit with being uncomfortable. And I think, you know, I honestly, forgive me, gentlemen, but I honestly think this is why we should have more women in product. This is why we should have more people of color. This is why we should have more queers, because we sit with discomfort friggin' every day. We sit with discomfort when we are in the room and they assume that we were there to bring coffee. We sit in discomfort when we give a presentation and they ask the dude who basically came to, like, you know, schlep our bag a question afterwards. We are used to sitting in that discomfort, and that discomfort really is about the space before you know the answer to something. And I think when I see my teams do it, when I see, you know, like people in the world do it, like we're so uncomfortable with not knowing. Like, who played Endora on Bewitched? Asked at a cocktail party not too long ago. 5 seconds later, everyone is like this, and no one was there and thought, like, what the heck's that woman's name? Like, Agnes Moorehead. So, like,
Agnes Moorehead, that's right. Oh,
no one gave their brain a chance. It was there. I don't know where my keys are, but it was there. No one gave their brain a chance. Now we have such immediate means of fulfilling, and we don't have to have the uncertainty of not knowing. And so we leap to a solution if we listened and if we opened the listening window more, we could arrive at more, better, differently informed solutions.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a missed opportunity. And profitability drives it in companies like ours, just the sense, I wrote an essay once, I'd love to find where the heck I put it, but it was, I called it Even If We're Going Backwards, like the phenomenon that if you're driving and you're going to be sitting in traffic for 5 minutes and you're like, I'm going to take a back roads way that'll take me 10 minutes, but at least you're moving forward, right? It's just, it didn't improve your situation. You just couldn't sit there with it. So, I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I think it's something we all need to practice a bit more.
Yeah, that I really want to dig in and understand this framing a little more, because I'd always thought of that Einstein quote, and there's the Abe Lincoln one about sharpening the axe. I've always thought about that as be deliberate, be conscious, think about what you're doing, and you're putting forward this idea that it's just don't fidget, don't just rush to judgment, don't just do the next thing you can do, don't just build the house or try to cut down the tree. It's about actually letting yourself sit with the uncertainty long enough to be open to learning the thing that's the answer. And I've never heard anyone frame those parables that way before, and I really I'm going to sit with that for days now, and it's kind of impacting me.
I'm here to ruin your life. Sorry.
No, it's really good. It's kind of it's the grit of sand in the oyster, right? That creates the pearl. It's the annoyance, and being comfortable with that is actually a really powerful element. That's, again, I agree with Aidan. I've tended to think of those parables in a similar kind of way, that you need to practice, you need to be prepared, you need to be ready. But that's a very, so I would say, to borrow from some of what you're saying, also sounds a bit Zen too. It's just sit down, shut up, stop, give it a minute. And I really, I will say that's very challenging for me. That's very challenging for me.
I mean, I'll challenge all of you to say, if you can think back to the last problem that you had and that you didn't know what to do with. And, it might have been a work thing, it might have been a home thing, who knows? And you're turning it over in your head 50 different ways, and you're just attacking it from all different angles. And maybe you're trying a few things and they're failing, and you're like, and then you take a shower, go for a walk with the dog, play with your kid, do something. And then you're just like, oh, it's that. Yeah. And the thing is, I think we are so, and the more experienced we are, especially the more experienced we are in a vertical, in a space when we're the expert, we're expected in some sense to have the heuristics. We're expected to have the lay of the land. And so it's particularly unuseful to be the expert when the lay of the land is changing. And if I can tell you one thing being my jam, it's industries at that weird inflection point. I love them because I'm never the expert, so I never have a horse in the race. I don't know what it's supposed to be. And I do have a lot of heuristics in my head of, just experience heuristics. But I also think that it's about staying curious. And, I think people just, they take, I'm the expert and I'm supposed to know all these things. And some of the best, interviewing people, some of the best people I've interviewed, I'm just like, well, so what do you think about gRPC? And they're like, I don't know a thing about it. And, if I were to come work for you, that would be something I would have to learn. And I'm just like, okay. And then because the people who feel too invested in being the expert are going to be like, I know it's something that begins with G, and then there's probably a remote procedure called
R afterward. Yeah.
This has an R.
But and I think as developers, do value that. They value novelty, but they also value being knowledgeable. So building tools for them can, sometimes be a treat because you're just like, look, it's something shiny, and they're like, ooh, and off they trot. I did with Kevin from Postman and some of the folks from Postman Galaxy. We did another sort of follow-up panel on Clubhouse, and it turned into GraphQL Fest. And so I asked one of the people who's kind of like stepped up and asked questions. I'm like, well, so why did you choose GraphQL? Like, what made that more suitable than other patterns, other protocols, other specs? And they're just like, it's new. Like, I wanted to try it. Like, basically, like, it's cool, and I thought, let's do that. And, like, there was no, in that particular case, there was no like, I evaluated the architecture, I considered the options, I optimized for blah as opposed to blah. And I'm just like, I wonder if that person had sort of, and it's, do it, like it's fun, it's an experiment. But you can't, if you build your entire organization like that, is just like, what the heck, and we're gonna just try this thing. Like, at a certain point, you have to evolve a philosophy, and you have to sit back and Mike, when I saw you at the architecture conference right before the world closed down in New York, I was fascinated, being a non-technical person, how much software architecture was like product management with like a more technical lens put over it. Like really like kind of gobsmacked about it. But it was sitting with the problem and making sure that the answer wasn't the first one that popped into your head or the one you were most comfortable with, but that you were really evaluating, well, what am I optimizing for? What are the outcomes that I want? What's it going to look like today? What's it going to look like in 5 years? Like, not in a you're never going to need it way, but in a, I can sit with it, I can contemplate it, I can make a better choice if I don't just do the first thing that leaps to mind. And to do that means you're sitting with uncertainty, you're sitting with discomfort, and it's, I think it's as vital a skill as any for programming or for anything.
Yeah, I think that, we talked about this, I think, in New York at the time, right? Because so much of what I end up talking about is always talking about weighing options. There is no single choice. There is no single direction. I've been reading Gregor Hoppy's series. Gregor's writing all these books, these sort of quick book experiences that he's publishing through LeanPub, and I'm on his cloud strategy one right now. And one of the things that really hits me that he says so well, and I think it's a quote he has, the decision you make is only interesting if there was also an equally valid decision that you didn't make. In other words, now that's impactful, right? If the decisions were fait accompli, if you had no choice, then you're really not doing anything. But if you hit a crossroads and you have to decide between two seemingly equal options, that's an impactful decision. That's your job as a manager, as a product manager, as an architect, or whatever. So that sort of hit me. Most of the things we do, there's no clear shot here. I'm doing the best I can, and I think that fits in a lot with with kind of what you're saying now. Yeah. I don't know. Aidan, you're in a product space. Does that strike you at all, or is that just BS?
No, I think there's well, the thing I wanted to expand on. First of all, I saw you in New York like 5 days before the world closed too, Mike, because you were at that conference.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, we
met in the bar or something, right?
Yeah, we had nuts and ginger beer.
Nuts and beer.
It was wonderful.
We were doing all the things we shouldn't be doing, right? We were sitting in a busy lobby where people were passing around, putting our hands in a bowl of nuts and drinking beers and talking loud.
No, but Ali, when you were talking about it, it isn't just like product and architecture. It's like everything is this. Like the world is this like fractal thing, and at all layers, like the answer is pretty much the same. And yeah, like it's about having the right perspective. It's about sitting with the problem long enough. And I think what we were talking about earlier about like giving people what they want. The products we really remember, they change the unit economics and they change the behaviors in such profound ways that it's like no longer possible to give the people what they want, because like there's not a place for gilded carriages anymore because there are cars racing by. Like it's not even a possibility to provide the people what they said they wanted a year ago. And that's the you see this with the cloud, like like in the early days, like people were like, what if it's Salesforce though, but it's in my data center? And it's like, well, that no. And Mark said no enough times that Salesforce has a tower. yeah. If you say no to everything in life, you don't necessarily end up with a tower, but no one who ends up with a tower doesn't say no to a lot of things in life. And there's something like deep and encoded in that whole idea that the only way to actually solve a problem for real is to change the mechanics of the problem in a way that that problem kind of is invisible. And I was actually just on the phone with a product guy that I'm interviewing, that I'm going to publish an interview with this person and a few other product people. But one of the points that this person said that blew my mind was like, if you're not creating other problems that are on the same par as the problem you solve for the people, then all you're doing is patching their problems or catching them. And I was like, that's gonna take a week to figure out.
Yeah.
It's like a koan. All great product advice is like a koan. You just have to sit with it until it no longer is valid.
Very good. Very good.
Oh my goodness. But it is, and the other thing, like another lens on what Mike said too, though, and actually that same sort of comment is, and this is one that I seem to say a lot, is if we're saying yes to doing this, what are we saying no to? Because like resource finite, so you have like. Some of the most effective lessons that I've learned, and it wasn't necessarily in product that I learned them, was it's always horse trading. And, you could defer risk, you could defer return, you could defer, any one element or whatever. But if you're saying yes to the thing right now, then you're saying no to something else. And I think too often we're very conscious of what we're saying yes to, and God knows, look at the way we're all overscheduled, I'm sure. Like we say yes too much. We don't actually make that trade-off and pay the price personally and in other ways. But in addition to that, I think it's also like, if we just say yes, we're not actually cataloging the cost of the thing, because that's in product, it's just like, all right, like, we're going to stop work on, the blue button to, begin work on the gray button. And now you'll have neither a gray button or a blue button for the next X sprints and, whatever. But like there's a point where the trade-off and the value is important. And that's why, so like tying back to the Ask conference, what I was actually presenting on that day was the IKEA effect, was the endowment effect. Like, the fact that once you've built something, whether or not you've built the right thing, you are going to attach value to it, like the same way that once you've suffered through building an IKEA dresser, you're going to attach more value to that ridiculous piece of particle board than the price. Like, if once you've built it, if you spent $200 on it, you will not sell it for like $400. Part of it is but it's your sunk cost, right? And the thing is worth $200. And I think like, when we look at that from an API perspective, that's why I said, virtualization, you try it out. You try it out at a point at which you're not as married to it, you're not as committed to it, and you're in the mind space to accept feedback and allow that feedback to change your mind. And then like, I often say, like, I wish people were like cabs in New York City, like when they're open, the little light goes on, because like, how many times have you had a conversation with somebody and you're like, I'm really trying to persuade you of this thing, and they're like, and it's just like their light's not on. No matter what you said to them, you can say, and I'm going to plate it in gold, and they'd just be like, nope, I am not open to be persuaded. I'm not curious about that anymore. And that to me is like the biggest. As a product person, you've got to stay curious, because the world is always changing and the needs are always changing. And if you don't look at it in weird and funky ways, that everyone else in the industry is going to be like, no.
So talk to me about being in the moment at the intersection of legacy technology, acquisitions, because I know you've got experience there, and then the new and shiny roadmap things. Like at that intersection, how do you be mindful and thoughtful right there, and maybe not see technical debt as bad, or do you see it as bad? I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, so Ready API is built on the foundation of SOAP UI open source. It is 15 years old, so I'm not a stranger to technical debt. But you know, what I think is really interesting when you start thinking about product as ecosystem as opposed to product as like thing I stuck in the box, right? Whether that box is digital or like whatever, is you start to think of new ways that you can approach old technology and old problems. So like, I'll give you an example out of Ready API land. So we just launched support for Apache Kafka and for async API specification. So you can pull in an async specification for, at this point, for the Kafka protocol, and you can then wire that together in these journey tests, these scenario tests, so you can, you know, validate your payload, you can deserialize and serialize and all that other wonderful stuff. But you can also then do the next step of like, okay, let's data drive that. Let's take that and then put it into this RESTful endpoint and then do this. And, you know, here's the whole scenario. Here's the whole capability that we're trying to evaluate and deliver, end-to-end testing, integration testing, that kind of thing. When we did that, we very deliberately took a different path than had been taken by, you know, product managers past in terms of creating that event-driven workflow, because we already supported AMQP and MQTT, JMS, blah, blah, blah. And what we're in the process of doing is saying, okay, it wasn't technical debt when we first did it, because if people came to us and they were testing MQTT, they weren't really like testing that with REST or with SOAP or with whatever. But now they are. Like microservices, absolutely they are. GraphQL and REST, absolutely. And so one of the things that we've done in terms of like, you know, how do we address technical debt is user experience debt. It's how do we want people to have this interaction? Like, how do we want them to chain these different things together? And so one of the things that we're working on now is building a common flow for any kind of create, you know, do this, data drive, blah, 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 that test step workflow. And that to me is really a powerful way of taking a look at our technical debt, taking a look at our UX debt, and saying, look, this product's going to be, it's been around for a really long time. It's going to be around for the future. How does it adapt? How do we make it easier when the next protocol comes along? Because somebody's going to say, I now have a spec that'll end all specs. And instead of, you know, 15, we're going to have 16. Like, how do you do that? How do you think about that in a way that enables users? And what are they doing? And what are they trying to do next? And allowing that to sort of inform us. So like, we actually have taken a look at our debt and said, well, it's an opportunity because we learned how people interacted with these different types of services. And what we're actually beginning to see is the commonality in those patterns. And because we can now look at that and say, okay, well, we did this, we did this, we did this, we see the commonality in those patterns, we believe that we can build a stronger experience that actually harmonizes those patterns instead of having them be, you know, 20 tools with a bow around them, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's a shared journey too. I mean, because your customers have the same technical debt too. They still have SOAP services as well as trying to figure out GraphQL and do Gherkin and behavioral driven on top. You know, so it's like you guys share this, and as long as it's about those relationships and that feedback loop with your, and it's experience driven, then I think it's shared in that context.
Yeah.
Well, we're approaching the time, you guys, so I got to do it. I apologize. I'm always like, we just can keep going, keep noting. I was like, no, we gotta end it. This has been great. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I love listening to your journey and hearing about this.
Oh, this has been super fun, and I'm so glad you guys are doing this because, you know, if people have a better sort of faith in their story, in their journey, like I want to see more women, more people of color, more LGBTQ, like, because those perspectives inform our industry, and like we absolutely should have the API community look like the world that is served by APIs, and it absolutely has that diversity in it. And I would love to see like more people feel empowered, because if I can do it, seriously, none of y'all should ever be worried. What in the heck am I doing here? I will never ever know the answer to this question, but I always have fun kind of getting there. So
Well, I think
Well,
oh, go ahead, Mike.
I was just gonna say, well, I'm glad you're here. However you got here, whatever it is, I'm glad you're here. It's fantastic. I just love it. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Yes.
the thing you're doing here is teaching us a whole lot, and we're happy that you spent your time and really appreciate the fact that you took time out of your day to come talk to us and share your stories with everyone.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Absolutely.
All righty, Ali. All right. Well, another good one for the books. Wow.
Yeah. And Allie and I, we talk every once in a while, and the list of things I learned, sort of what you said before, Aidan, list of things I learn about what she's done or where she's been or what skills she has just constantly grows. And I also kind of collect up lists of things I want to talk about in the future. And I brought some of those to our session here today, but I've got stuff right here in my little list that we never even talked about. She has got so many other things, so many other angles to her experience that are so informative. So like Aidan said, I'm really glad she could take the time, and it was just fantastic. I learned something every time.
Agreed. Well, with that said, I think we got to go into the weekend, you guys. So
yes, we do.
Thank you. Until next week, I'm going to let you go first, Mike.
You betcha. You guys take care. We'll see you next week. We'll do it again.
All righty, guys.
Have a great one.
Well, thanks, Aidan. I do want to get to the barrel discussion, you on a barrel, but we're going to save that for the future. So I will see you on the Slacks and on the webs until we talk next time.
Sounds good. Have a lovely weekend, Ken. Thanks so much.
All righty, man. Cheers. Always fun. Always fun. All righty. See you guys later.